Vivian thought she was entering the mansion to steal money, but she had no idea she was actually walking into the darkest secret of her own life. Vivian Carter had spent most of her life believing that bad luck followed her everywhere. By the age of 26, she had already buried her mother, lost her apartment, and watched her younger brother fall deeper into debt with dangerous people. Every month felt heavier than the one before it. Bills kept stacking up on the kitchen counter of the tiny motel room where she lived, and every call from the hospital made her chest tighten with fear. Her younger brother, Mason, needed surgery that their family could never afford. The doctors had already warned her that waiting too long could make things worse. Vivian had tried everything. She worked double shifts at a diner outside the city. She sold her mother's jewelry. She borrowed money from people she knew she should never trust. None of it was enough. Then one night, everything changed. A man she barely knew slid into the booth across from her at the diner just before closing time. He wore a black coat, expensive watch, and carried himself like someone who had spent his whole life giving orders. He never smiled. He simply placed a folded piece of paper on the table and told her there was money hidden inside the private safe of one of the most feared men in the city. That man was Damian Moretti. Even hearing Damian's name made people lower their voices. Stories about him spread through the city like urban legends. Some claimed he had built an empire through fear. Others believed he was more dangerous because he rarely needed violence to get what he wanted. People disappeared after crossing him. Entire businesses changed owners overnight. Politicians, police officers, judges, everyone seemed afraid of him. Vivian should have walked away the moment she heard Damian's name. But the stranger had mentioned a number, $500,000. It was enough money to save Mason, pay every debt she had, and disappear from the city forever. For the next 3 days, Vivian barely slept. She memorized the layout of Damian's mansion from stolen blueprints. She studied guard schedules. She watched security patterns from a distance while sitting in her old car with coffee growing cold in her hands. The mansion stood on a hill overlooking the city, surrounded by black iron gates and tall stone walls covered in ivy. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Cameras watched every corner of the property. Armed guards moved around the entrance every few minutes. Expensive black vehicles lined the driveway like silent warnings. By the fourth night, Vivian knew she had run out of time. Mason's condition had worsened, and the hospital wanted money by the end of the week. She could not wait any longer. Rain poured over the city the night she made her move. Thunder rolled across the sky, making the streets look darker than usual. Vivian wore black clothes, gloves, and a hood pulled low over her face. Her hands shook as she parked near the edge of the property. For a moment, she sat in the car staring at the mansion in the distance. Her heart pounded, so hard it felt painful. She kept thinking about her mother's voice telling her that desperate people made dangerous decisions. She thought about Mason lying in a hospital bed. She thought about how there would be no second chance if she failed. Then she stepped out into the rain. The back wall of the property was lower than the rest, hidden behind thick trees and bushes. Vivian climbed carefully, her wet hands slipping against the stone. For one terrifying second, she nearly lost her balance. But she managed to pull herself over and land hard on the other side. The grounds were silent except for the rain. She crouched low and moved between hedges, keeping close to the shadows. Every few feet, she stopped to watch the guards. They followed the exact pattern she had studied. 2 men near the front entrance, 1 near the garage, another walking along the east side of the house. Vivian waited until the nearest guard disappeared around the corner before moving again. The mansion looked even larger up close. Massive windows stretched across the back of the house, glowing faintly with warm light. Expensive artwork hung on the walls inside. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceilings. Everything about the place screamed power and money. And somehow, that only made Vivian angrier. She thought about all the nights she had gone hungry, all the bills she could not pay, all the mornings she woke up exhausted and terrified of what would happen next. People like Damian lived in mansions, while people like her fought just to survive. She reached the back entrance and pulled a small metal tool from her pocket. Her breathing slowed as she worked on the lock. It took longer than she expected because of the rain and her shaking hands. Every second felt louder than the last. Finally, the door clicked open. Vivian slipped inside. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. The polished marble floors reflected the dim light from the chandeliers above. Long hallways stretched in every direction. Expensive paintings lined the walls beside shelves filled with books and old statues. The air smelled faintly of wood, leather, and cigar smoke. Vivian moved carefully through the hallways. Following the map she had memorized, the safe room was supposed to be hidden behind Damien's private office on the second floor. She climbed the staircase slowly, freezing twice when she heard footsteps somewhere in the distance. Her pulse raced every time the floor creaked beneath her feet. When she reached the second floor, she found Damien's office at the end of a long hallway. The doors were dark wood with gold handles. Vivian stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind her. The room looked exactly like the blueprints had described. A large desk sat near the center, covered with neatly stacked papers. Shelves filled with books reached the ceiling. A glass cabinet held expensive whiskey bottles. A painting of a stormy ocean hung on the far wall. Behind that painting was the safe room entrance. Vivian crossed the office carefully and lifted the painting from the wall. There it was, a steel keypad hidden inside the wall. Her stomach dropped. The stranger had given her a code, but now that she stood there staring at the keypad, fear suddenly hit her harder than before. If the code failed, alarms could go off. Guards could rush in. She could end up dead before sunrise. Her fingers hovered over the buttons. Then she entered the code. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the wall unlocked with a soft mechanical click. Vivian exhaled sharply. The hidden door opened just enough for her to squeeze through. Inside, the safe room was colder than the rest of the mansion. Rows of shelves lined the walls. Cash, gold bars, jewelry, passports, and stacks of documents filled the room. There were paintings worth millions, locked cases filled with watches, and black folders labeled with names she did not recognize. Vivian stared in disbelief. There was enough money in that room to change her entire life. She grabbed a duffel bag from her backpack and began stuffing cash inside as quickly as she could. Bundles of money disappeared into bag one after another. Her hands moved fast, but her mind stayed trapped in panic. She kept imagining footsteps outside the office. She kept expecting alarms. Then she noticed something strange. At the back of the room stood another safe. Smaller, older. Unlike everything else in the room, this safe looked personal. There was no gold around it, no stacks of money, just one small silver key already hanging from the lock. Vivian frowned. Something about it felt wrong. People like Damien did not leave things unlocked unless they wanted them found. She should have ignored it. She already had more money than she could carry. But curiosity pulled her closer. The safe was old and scratched, like it had been opened many times over the years. Vivian reached for the key slowly. Her hand trembled as she turned it. The safe opened with a soft creak. At first, she thought it was empty. Then she saw the photograph lying inside. Vivian pulled it out carefully. The moment she looked down, the blood drained from her face. It was a picture of a little girl standing in front of an old house, somewhere in the countryside. The girl looked no older than 6. She had dark hair, pale skin, and a nervous expression. It was Vivian. There was no doubt about it. Even as a child, she had the same eyes, the same small scar above her eyebrow, the same silver necklace around her neck that her mother once told her had belonged to her grandmother. Vivian stared at the photo in horror. Her breathing became shallow. The picture looked old, much older than it should have been. And written in black ink on the back of the photograph were 5 words that made her entire body go cold. She was never supposed to survive. Vivian's hand shook violently as she realized the photograph had been taken years before she ever knew Damien Moretti existed. The moment Vivian saw her own face inside the safe, she understood that someone had been watching her long before she was born. For several seconds, Vivian Carter could not move. The photograph remained frozen in her trembling hands, while the room around her seemed to disappear. The cold walls of the safe room, the shelves filled with money, the distant sound of thunder outside the mansion. None of it felt real anymore. Only the picture mattered. Vivian slowly lifted it closer to her face. The photograph was old, faded around the edges, and slightly bent in one corner, as if it had been carried around many times before being hidden away. It showed a little girl standing alone in front of a large white farmhouse with peeling paint and broken windows. Tall, dead grass surrounded the house. Behind it stood a line of dark trees beneath a gray sky. The little girl wore a blue dress with white flowers stitched around the collar. Her dark hair rested on her shoulders, and she looked directly at the camera with wide, uncertain eyes. Vivian knew that face. Even though the child looked younger, thinner, and more frightened than she remembered ever feeling, there was no mistaking her. It was her. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the photograph. She studied every detail. Around the little girl's neck was the same silver necklace Vivian still owned. Her mother had always told her it belonged to her grandmother, passed down through generations of women in the family. Vivian rarely wore it anymore, but she kept it hidden in the bottom drawer of her motel dresser because it was one of the few things she had left from her mother. Seeing it in the photograph made her chest tighten. That necklace should not have existed back then, not unless her mother had lied. Vivian turned the photograph over again and stared at the sentence written on the back. She was never supposed to survive. The words looked old, written in black ink with sharp, uneven handwriting. They felt more like a warning than a message. A cold chill moved down Vivian's spine. For the first time since entering the mansion, stealing money no longer mattered. Her brother's surgery, her debts, her escape plan. Everything suddenly felt distant compared to the terrifying mystery in her hands. Why would Damien Moretti keep her childhood photo locked inside a private safe? Why would someone write those words on the back? And most importantly, why did it feel like the photograph had been waiting for her? Vivian forced herself to breathe. She looked back inside the smaller safe. There were only a few more items inside. An old key, a folded newspaper clipping, a small velvet pouch, and beneath them, a thick brown envelope tied with black string. Vivian reached for the newspaper first. The paper was yellow with age, the corners worn and fragile. The headline immediately caught her attention. Local family killed in house fire. Her eyes moved lower. The article described a fire that destroyed a farmhouse outside the city nearly 20 years earlier. According to the report, a wealthy couple and their young daughter had died in the fire. Authorities believed faulty wiring caused the blaze. Vivian looked back at the picture. The farmhouse in the article looked exactly like the one behind the little girl. Her pulse quickened. The dead family in the article had 3 names listed beneath the headline: Thomas Whitmore, Elena Whitmore, and their 6-year-old daughter, Isabella Whitmore. Vivian froze. Isabella. For some reason, the name hit her harder than it should have. It felt familiar. Not familiar in the way a stranger's name might sound familiar after hearing it once or twice. It felt deeper than that. Older, like something hidden in the darkest corner of her memory. Her head began to ache. Vivian pressed a hand against her forehead as flashes of strange images moved through her mind. A woman brushing her hair in front of a mirror. A little white bedroom with floral wallpaper. A man laughing near a fireplace. A voice calling a name she could almost hear. Isabella. Then the memory disappeared as quickly as it came. Vivian stepped backward, nearly losing her balance. None of this made sense. Her mother had always told her she was born in Chicago. She had always believed her father died before she was born. She had spent her entire life thinking her past was simple, ordinary, and sad. Now it felt like every memory she had was built on a lie. Vivian grabbed a velvet pouch next. Inside was a silver ring with a strange symbol carved into it. It looked old and expensive, with a black stone in the center and an unusual design around the edges. 2 snakes wrapped around a single rose. Vivian frowned. She had seen the symbol before. Not in real life. In dreams. Ever since she was a child, she had recurring nightmares about a large gate with the same symbol carved into the iron. In those dreams, she was always running through a dark forest while someone shouted her name behind her. She used to wake up screaming. Her mother always told her it was just her imagination. Now Vivian was not so sure. She slipped the ring into her pocket and reached for the envelope. The string around it was old and dusty. She untied it carefully and opened the flap. Inside were several documents. Most of them looked official. Property records, medical papers, photographs. Then she saw it, a birth certificate. Vivian pulled it out slowly. The document looked authentic, complete with a hospital seal and an official signature near the bottom. For a moment, she only looked at the birth date. It matched hers exactly. Then her eyes moved upward to the name. Isabella Grace Whitmore. Vivian's entire body went numb. She read it again, and again, the same birth date, the same city, the same date of birth. But the name was different. Her name was not Vivian Carter, according to the paper in her hands. Her real name was Isabella Whitmore. Her breathing became uneven. She quickly looked at the names listed under parents. Thomas Whitmore, Elena Whitmore, not the mother who raised her, not the father she had been told died before she was born. These were strangers, rich strangers, dead strangers. Vivian could barely think straight. She looked at the farmhouse in the picture again. The article had said the family died in a fire. But if Isabella Whitmore died in that fire, then how was Vivian standing here alive? The answer came to her instantly. Someone had lied. Someone had taken her away from that house, changed her name, and hidden her from the world. And somehow, Damien Moretti knew the truth. The realization made her feel sick. Vivian had heard stories about Damien for years. Damien Moretti was not just feared because of his money or power. People feared him because he always knew things he should not know. He knew secrets before families told each other. He knew who was loyal and who was planning betrayal. He knew which judges could be bought and which enemies needed to disappear. If Damien had hidden this safe inside his mansion, then this was not random. He had kept these things for a reason. Vivian looked deeper into the envelope. Near the bottom, she found one final photograph. Unlike the first one, this picture was newer. It showed Damien standing outside a black car beside two other men. He looked younger, maybe his late 20s, but there was no mistaking him. Dark suit, cold eyes, calm expression. Beside him stood a little girl. Vivian. She looked no older than 7. The photograph nearly slipped from her hands. She had no memory of it. None. Yet there she was, standing only a few feet away from Damien Moretti, as if she knew him. Vivian stared at the picture in disbelief. Damien's expression in the photograph was strange. Not cold, not cruel, protective. His hand rested lightly on the little girl's shoulder, as if he was guarding her, as if she mattered to him. Vivian backed away from the safe. Her mind raced with questions she could not answer. Had Damien kidnapped her? Had he saved her? Was he the reason she lost her real family? Or was he the only reason she was still alive? Then she heard something. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps outside the office door. Vivian's heart nearly stopped. Someone was coming. She quickly shoved the photographs, birth certificate, ring, and newspaper clipping back into the envelope. She grabbed the bag of money and turned toward the hidden door. The footsteps grew louder. Then she heard a voice in the hallway. Low, calm, dangerous. She could not hear every word, but she recognized the name instantly. Damien. Vivian's blood ran cold. He was home. She slipped out of the safe room and quietly moved across the office toward the door on the opposite side. Voices echoed closer with every passing second. She looked back one last time at the photograph in her hand. The little girl in the picture was not Vivian Carter. She was Isabella Whitmore. And for the first time in her life, Vivian realized Carter might not be her real last name. Vivian spent her whole life believing she knew who she was. But one document was about to destroy that belief forever. The rain had not stopped by the time Vivian Carter finally escaped from Damien Moretti's mansion. She drove through the empty streets with shaking hands, barely able to focus on the road ahead. The envelope sat on the passenger seat beside her, almost glowing beneath the weak light from the dashboard. Every few seconds, Vivian looked at it again, as if the documents inside might somehow disappear. By the time she reached the motel, dawn was beginning to rise over the city. The room smelled like old carpet, cheap coffee, and cigarette smoke from the neighboring rooms. Mason was still asleep in the second bed, pale and weak beneath a thin blanket. His face looked thinner than it had only a week earlier. Vivian stood near the door for a long moment, watching him breathe. The bag of stolen money sat near her feet. A few hours earlier, that money had been the only thing she cared about. Now it felt meaningless compared to the envelope in her hands. She quietly sat at the small table by the window and spread the documents out beneath the weak yellow light. The birth certificate remained at the center. Isabella Grace Whitmore. The name felt heavier every time she read it. Vivian reached for her laptop and typed the name into a search engine. At first, nothing appeared. Then, buried among old newspaper archives, she found another article about the Whitmore family fire. The article was nearly identical to the newspaper clipping from Damien's safe. Wealthy family. Dead parents. Young daughter lost in the fire. But something was different this time. Near the bottom of the article was a sentence she had not noticed before. Authorities never recovered the daughter's body. Vivian's chest tightened. She read the sentence again. And again. If Isabella Whitmore's body was never found, then the official story had been wrong all these years. Someone had wanted people to believe she died. Someone had erased her. The motel room suddenly felt too small. Vivian stood up and began pacing. Every answer seemed to create 3 more questions. Why had her mother never told her any of this? Why would someone fake the death of a child? And why would Damien Moretti keep evidence of it hidden in his mansion? She needed help. But she could not go to the police. If Damien discovered she had stolen from him, she would already be in danger. Involving the police would only make things worse. There was only one person she could think of, Ethan Blake. Ethan was a private investigator known for finding people who did not want to be found. He was not cheap, and he was not easy to trust, but he had a reputation for getting answers. Vivian met him later that afternoon in a quiet office above an old pawn shop on the edge of the city. The office looked exactly how she imagined it would. Dusty windows, stacks of files everywhere, a broken ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Ethan sat behind a wooden desk covered in papers. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with short brown hair, tired eyes, and a face that suggested he had spent years seeing things most people never wanted to see. He studied Vivian carefully as she placed the birth certificate and photographs on his desk. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair. "This is not normal," he finally said. Vivian crossed her arms tightly. "None of this is normal." Ethan picked up the birth certificate first. His expression darkened. "This document is real," he said. "It is not fake." Vivian felt her stomach twist. Ethan moved to the newspaper clipping next. "The Whitmore family was powerful," he said quietly. "Old money, political connections. They owned land outside the city and had business ties all over the state. Then why have I never heard of them?" "Because people stopped talking about them after the fire." Vivian frowned. "That does not make sense." Ethan looked back at the article. "It does when wealthy families want secrets buried." Those words stayed in Vivian's mind. Wealthy families want secrets buried. For the next few hours, Ethan searched through databases, old police records, and missing person archives, while Vivian sat nearby, watching every move he made. The deeper Ethan looked, the stranger the story became. There was almost no information about Isabella Whitmore after the fire. No death certificate, no school records, no medical history, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared from the world overnight. Then Ethan found something. An old police report. He opened the scan file and leaned closer to the screen. Vivian moved beside him. The report was dated only 2 days after the fire. According to the document, authorities had received an anonymous tip claiming a young girl matching Isabella Whitmore's description had been seen leaving the property before the house collapsed. The witness described seeing a black car parked near the woods behind the farmhouse. A man had been standing beside the vehicle. The report did not include his name, only a short physical description. Dark hair, tall, black coat, scar near the jawline. Vivian looked at Ethan. "Do you think that was Damien?" Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he opened another file. Inside were old photographs from the crime scene. Most showed the burned farmhouse and the surrounding land. Then one image caught Vivian's attention. Near the far edge of the property, barely visible beside a line of trees, was a black car, and standing beside it was a man. The image was blurry, but Vivian could still make out his shape. Tall, dark coat, one hand in his pocket, watching the fire from a distance. Her throat went dry. She had seen that posture before, in the newer photo from the safe, in the stories people told about him. It looked like Damien Moretti. Vivian stepped away from the desk. Her breathing became uneven again. She wanted answers, but every answer only pulled Damien deeper into her past. Why was he there? What connection could he possibly have to her family? Ethan continued searching. An hour later, he found another strange detail, a report from a small orphanage outside the city. The orphanage had closed nearly 15 years earlier, but some records had been digitized. One entry stood out immediately. A little girl had arrived there only weeks after the Whitmore fire. No parents, no clear background, no official birth certificate. Only one note attached to her file. Temporary name, Vivian Carter. Vivian stared at the screen. Temporary. Not permanent. Not real. Temporary. The word hit her harder than anything else. She had spent her whole life carrying a name that was never meant to belong to her. According to the orphanage report, Vivian stayed there for less than 3 months before being adopted by the woman she believed was her mother. But one part of the report made Ethan stop. "There's a missing page," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" The file jumps from intake records to adoption papers. There should be another page in between. Vivian looked at him. What would be on it? Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the screen. The identity of the person who brought you there. Silence filled the office. Vivian felt her chest tighten again. Whoever had taken her from the farmhouse, whoever had hidden her, whoever had given her a fake name, that person had vanished from the records, as if someone had removed every trace on purpose. Outside, thunder rolled through the city again. The sound made Vivian jump. She looked down at the photograph of herself standing beside Damien. There was something she had not noticed before. Behind Damien, partially hidden near the edge of the picture, stood another man. Older, thinner. His face was difficult to see, but he wore a ring with the same symbol Vivian found inside the velvet pouch. 2 snakes wrapped around a rose. Vivian pointed at it. "What is that symbol?" Ethan leaned closer. For the first time since she entered the office, he looked genuinely disturbed. "I've seen it before," he said quietly. "Where?" He hesitated. "In old case files involving organized crime families." Vivian's heart sank. "What does it mean?" Ethan swallowed slowly. "It belongs to a group called the Salazar Circle." Vivian frowned. "I've never heard of them." "Most people haven't," Ethan said, "because the people who cross them usually disappear." He opened another file. An old article appeared on the screen, showing a photograph of several men leaving a courthouse decades earlier. One of the men wore the same ring. The article mentioned a powerful criminal family led by a man named Victor Salazar. The name meant nothing to Vivian, but Ethan looked deeply uncomfortable. "Victor Salazar was connected to the Whitmores years ago," he said. "Business deals, political favors, rumors of money laundering." Vivian stared at the screen. "So my family knew criminals?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Possibly worse than criminals." The room went silent again. Vivian felt trapped between 2 impossible truths. Either Damien Moretti had destroyed her life, or he had saved her from something even worse. Then Ethan found one final file. It was an old security report taken from a private airport outside the city on the night of the Whitmore fire. A black car had arrived shortly before midnight. The report listed 1 passenger, Damien Moretti. Vivian stared at the name. Then Ethan scrolled lower. There was another note beneath it. 1 child, female, approximately 6 years old, seen entering the vehicle. Vivian's blood ran cold as Ethan found proof that Damien Moretti had been there on the day she disappeared. The more Vivian learned about Damien Moretti, the more she realized the most dangerous man in the city might not be the real monster. For a long time, neither Vivian nor Ethan Blake spoke. The old airport report remained open on the computer screen between them. Damien Moretti's name sat there in black and white beside a single line that changed everything. 1 child, female, approximately 6 years old, seen entering the vehicle. Vivian stared at the sentence until the words started to blur. A part of her wanted to believe there had been some mistake. Another part of her knew there were too many pieces connecting Damien to her past for it to be random. The photograph, the birth certificate, the old farmhouse, the airport record. Damien had been there. The question was no longer whether he knew her. The question was why. Ethan leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand across his face. If Damien took you from that fire, he said quietly, then there are only two possibilities. Vivian looked at him. He kidnapped me, she said, or he saved you. Those words followed Vivian for the rest of the night. She left Ethan's office after sunset, but instead of returning to the motel, she drove through the city without any real destination in mind. The streets were crowded with traffic and neon lights, but none of it felt real to her anymore. She kept seeing Damien's face in her mind. Cold eyes, dark suit, calm expression, a man feared by everyone, a man who somehow had pictures of her from childhood hidden inside his private safe. By midnight, Vivian found herself parked outside a 24-hour diner near the harbor. She sat alone in a booth by the window while rain tapped softly against the glass. She opened the envelope again. The newer photograph of Damien stood out the most. He looked younger, but there was still something controlled and unreadable about him. Beside him, 7-year-old Vivian stood close enough to touch him. What bothered her most was not Damien's expression. It was her own. The little girl in the picture did not look scared. She looked safe. That thought made Vivian feel sick. Because if Damien had truly been a monster everyone believed he was, then why did the child version of her seem completely unafraid beside him? The next morning, Vivian returned to Ethan's office. He had spent the entire night digging through criminal records, financial reports, and old newspaper archives connected to Damien Moretti. The walls of his office were now covered in printed photographs, timelines, and handwritten notes. At the center of everything was Damien. Damien Moretti was born into one of the oldest crime families in the city. His father had controlled gambling rings, smuggling operations, and illegal casinos along the coast. His mother came from another powerful family with connections to judges, police officers, and politicians. Damien had grown up surrounded by violence. According to Ethan's research, he witnessed his first murder at the age of 12. By 16, he was already working for his father. By 25, he had taken over the entire empire. People feared Damien because he was different from other crime bosses. He was not loud. He did not waste time making threats. He rarely appeared in public. He spoke quietly, moved carefully, and always seemed 3 steps ahead of everyone else. His empire stretched across half the state. Nightclubs, luxury hotels, shipping companies, construction firms. Half of them looked legal from the outside. But behind closed doors, Damien controlled gambling, blackmail, smuggling, weapons, and information, especially information. He built his power on secrets. Ethan said while flipping through another file, Damien doesn't destroy people with bullets unless he has to. He destroys them by learning what they're hiding. Vivian looked at the photos spread across the desk. Damien appeared beside politicians, judges, businessmen, celebrities. He had influence everywhere. Then why keep evidence about me? Vivian asked. If he wanted me gone, he could have destroyed all of it years ago. Ethan stayed silent for a moment. Then he opened another folder. Inside were several reports connected to attacks on Damien over the years. Car bombings, shootings, attempted kidnappings, bribes, assassination attempts, dozens of them. Damien had enemies everywhere. But one name kept appearing more than the others. Victor Salazar. Vivian recognized it immediately. The Salazar Circle. The same symbol from the ring. The same criminal family connected to the Whitmores. Ethan placed a newspaper clipping in front of her. The article showed a much younger Damien standing outside a courthouse with blood on his shirt and a bandage across his shoulder. The headline read, Moretti heir survives assassination attempt. According to the article, the attack happened nearly 20 years earlier, the same year as the Whitmore fire, the same year Vivian disappeared. Victor Salazar wanted Damien dead for years, Ethan said. Their families were enemies long before either of them took power. Why? Territory, money, politics, revenge. With families like theirs, it could be anything. Vivian looked at another article. This one described a fire at a warehouse owned by Damien's father. 12 men died inside. The police blamed Victor Salazar. Another report showed Damien attending his mother's funeral after she was killed in a car bombing. Again, rumors pointed to Victor. Damien's life had been filled with violence long before Vivian entered it. And suddenly, something about him felt different. Not innocent, never innocent, but damaged, like someone who had spent his entire life fighting monsters and slowly become one himself. That afternoon, Ethan found an old photograph of Damien taken around the same time as the airport report. He looked exhausted in the picture, standing outside a hospital with bruises on his face and blood on his shirt. In his arms, wrapped in a blanket, was a little girl, Vivian. She looked asleep, protected. For several seconds, she could not look away. The image broke something inside her, because no matter how hard she tried, she could not deny what she saw. Damien was holding her like someone trying to keep her safe, not like someone trying to hurt her. Maybe he was hiding you, Ethan said quietly. Vivian looked up. From who? Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed her another report. This one was different. It was not from the police. It was from a private security company hired by the Whitmore family before the fire. The report mentioned threats against Thomas Whitmore and his wife Elena. Most of the threats came from business rivals. But one line stood out. The family had been warned that Victor Salazar was becoming increasingly interested in their daughter. Vivian's face went pale. Interested how? Ethan looked uncomfortable. There isn't much detail. Just rumors. What kind of rumors? He hesitated before answering. Rumors that Victor believed your family owed him something. Some people thought there was a deal between the Whitmores and the Salazars. Vivian stared at him. What kind of deal involved a child? Ethan's silence was enough to terrify her. For the first time, Vivian understood that her past might be darker than she imagined. This was not just about a fire, or an adoption, or a fake name. This was about families powerful enough to erase children, fake deaths, and bury entire lives. Ethan continued digging through the reports until evening. Then he found something that made both of them stop. An old handwritten letter scanned into one of the files. It had been written by Elena Whitmore only days before the fire. Most of it was difficult to read because of water damage, but one sentence remained clear. If anything happens to us, Damien must take Isabella before Victor finds her. Vivian's hands began shaking again. She read the sentence over and over. Damien must take Isabella, not steal her, not hurt her, take her, protect her. Suddenly, the entire story looked different. Damien had not taken her because he wanted to. He had taken her because someone asked him to, because someone trusted him more than they trusted anyone else. Vivian sat down heavily in the chair. She felt emotionally exhausted. For years, she had believed monsters looked obvious. She thought monsters were easy to recognize. But now she realized the world was more complicated than that. Sometimes the most feared man in the city was not the villain. Sometimes he was the one standing between a child and something even worse. Outside the office window, the sky darkened again. Ethan turned back toward the computer screen one last time. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Vivian looked at him. He opened a final file. It was a financial record connected to the Whitmore family from a year before the fire. Several large payments had been made to a shell company tied directly to Victor Salazar. Then Ethan found a note attached to the payments. Special arrangement regarding the daughter. Vivian felt her stomach drop, because in that moment, she realized another Mafia boss may have ordered her disappearance. Vivian believed Damien was a villain, but the truth was much worse because the real enemy had been hiding in the shadows the entire time. For several minutes, the office remained silent after Ethan showed her the financial records. Vivian Carter could not stop staring at the note attached to the payments. Special arrangement regarding the daughter. The words felt cold, almost inhuman, as if she had not been a child, as if she had been nothing more than part of a business deal. Vivian slowly leaned back in her chair and pressed both hands against her face. Every new truth made her past darker. She had already learned that her real name was Isabella Whitmore. She had learned that her family died in a suspicious fire, that Damien Moretti may have saved her, and that someone powerful had tried to erase her existence. But this was different. This suggested her family had known something terrible was coming. And worse, they may have been part of it. Ethan Blake continued looking through the files while Vivian tried to steady her breathing. Then he found an old newspaper article from nearly 25 years earlier. The article included a photograph of a younger Victor Salazar standing outside a courthouse. Victor looked to be in his 40s at the time. Tall, gray suit, dark eyes, calm expression. Unlike Damien, Victor did not look dangerous in an obvious way. He looked respectable, like a politician, like a man who knew exactly how to hide his cruelty behind money and charm. "That's him," Vivian asked quietly. Ethan nodded. Victor Salazar. Vivian stared at the picture. She expected to feel fear. Instead, she felt anger, because Victor looked like the kind of man people trusted too easily. The kind of man who could smile in public while destroying lives in private. Ethan opened another file. Victor Salazar came from a wealthy Latino crime family with deep political connections stretching back generations. Unlike Damien's family, the Salazars avoided public violence whenever possible. They preferred blackmail, business pressure, corruption, and quiet disappearances. They owned hotels, casinos, construction companies, and ports along the coast. Officially, they were respected businessmen. Unofficially, they were one of the most feared criminal families in the country. Victor was known for being intelligent, patient, and cruel. He rarely acted out of anger. He acted out of pride. And according to Ethan's research, Victor had hated the Whitmore family for years. Not because of money, because of blood. Years earlier, Elena Whitmore, Vivian's biological mother, had fallen in love with Thomas Whitmore, a wealthy businessman from one of the city's oldest families. Victor had wanted Elena for himself, but Elena rejected him. Some reports claim Victor became obsessed after that. He viewed her rejection as humiliation. Worse, he blamed Thomas for stealing what he believed should belong to him. Over time, that anger turned into revenge. He hated them because they embarrassed him. Ethan said, "People like Victor don't forget things like that." Vivian looked down at the old article. "He destroyed my family because my mother said no to him?" Ethan did not answer right away. Then he quietly said, "Men like Victor don't believe women are allowed to say no." The sentence hit Vivian harder than anything else, because suddenly everything felt even uglier. This was not only about power, it was about control. Victor had not wanted Elena because he loved her. He wanted her because he believed he owned her. And when he could not have her, he decided no one else could either. Ethan kept searching. He found another report connected to Victor's business dealings with the Whitmores. According to the file, Thomas Whitmore had borrowed money from Victor years earlier after a failed business investment. The debt had grown larger over time, eventually reaching millions of dollars. Victor used that debt to pressure family. At first, he demanded property, then business shares, then political favors. Eventually, according to the report, he demanded something much worse, a future arrangement involving Isabella Whitmore. Vivian felt sick. What does that mean? Ethan's face looked tense. There are rumors Victor wanted to marry you into his family when you were older. Vivian stared at him in disbelief. That's insane. It gets worse, Ethan said quietly. He opened another file. Inside was a handwritten letter from Thomas Whitmore to an attorney. The letter was never sent. Much of it was damaged, but one sentence remained readable. Victor says the debt ends if Isabella becomes part of his family. Vivian's stomach twisted. For the first time, she truly understood how dangerous Victor was. He had not just wanted revenge. He had wanted ownership. Ownership over her mother. Ownership over her family. Ownership over her. The office suddenly felt colder. Vivian stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the streets below looked dark and empty. She wrapped her arms around herself. How could my parents let this happen? Ethan hesitated. Then he picked up another document from the desk. It looks like they tried to protect you in the end. Vivian turned back toward him. The document was another letter, this time from Elena Whitmore. Her handwriting looked rushed and uneven. Part of the page had been torn away. But one paragraph remained. Thomas wants to pay Victor and end this, but it is too late. He will never let us go. If we cannot escape, Isabella must disappear before he takes her. Vivian slowly sat back down. Disappear before he takes her. Those words stayed in her mind. Her parents had not abandoned her because they stopped loving her. They abandoned her because they were trying to save her. But at the same time, another painful truth remained. They waited too long. They made deals with monsters. And in the end, they left their daughter trapped in the middle of a war she never asked for. For a long time, neither Vivian nor Ethan spoke. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed immediately. "What is it?" Vivian asked. "I don't know." He stood and moved toward the window. There's a black SUV parked across the street. Vivian's body stiffened. "What?" It wasn't there earlier. She walked toward the window beside him. The SUV sat near the curb with dark windows and no license plate on the front. Two men stood beside it smoking cigarettes. Both wore dark coats. Both looked directly at the office building. Vivian felt fear crawl through her chest. "Do you think they know I'm here?" Ethan looked serious. "I think they've known for a while." A few seconds later, one of the men looked up directly toward the office window. Vivian stepped back immediately. Her pulse raced. "Who are they?" Ethan did not answer. Instead, he quickly began gathering papers from his desk. "We need to leave." "Right now?" "Yes." The urgency in his voice made Vivian move faster. She grabbed the envelope, the birth certificate, and the photographs while Ethan stuffed several files into a bag. Then his office lights suddenly went out. The room went dark. Vivian froze. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The only light came from the street below. Then came the sound. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, getting closer. Ethan reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a handgun. Vivian's breathing became shallow. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. For a moment, everything went silent. Then someone slammed against the door hard enough to shake the walls. Vivian nearly screamed. Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back exit. "Hurry!" They ran through a narrow hallway behind the office and down a staircase that led into the alley behind the building. Rain poured from the sky as they burst outside. Ethan led her toward his car parked near the back street. But before they could reach it, headlights suddenly flashed across the alley. A black SUV blocked the exit. Another vehicle appeared behind them. They were trapped. 3 men stepped out into the rain. One of them wore the same silver ring with the snake and rose symbol. Victor Salazar symbol. Vivian stepped backward. The man in front smiled slightly. "Miss Whitmore," he said calmly, "you've been very difficult to find." Vivian's blood ran cold. He did not call her Vivian. He called her Whitmore. Ethan quickly stepped in front of her. "Run," he whispered. Then everything happened at once. One of the men rushed forward. Ethan fired his gun. The sound exploded through the alley. Vivian stumbled backward as chaos erupted around her. A second man grabbed Ethan from behind. Another struck him across the face hard enough to knock him to the ground. Vivian tried to run, but one of the men caught her arm. She screamed and pulled away just enough to break free. Then she ran. She ran through the rain, through dark streets, through traffic and noise, not daring to look back. By the time she finally stopped, she was several blocks away and completely alone. Her chest burned. Her hands shook. Rain soaked her clothes and hair. Then she looked down. Ethan's bag was still in her hand. She slowly opened it. Inside were the files, the photographs, and one final note Ethan had scribbled only minutes earlier. "If anything happens to me, look for the name Angela Vance." Vivian stared at the note in horror as she realized Victor's men had kidnapped Ethan before he could reveal the full truth. The people Vivian trusted all her life were not her protectors. They were the reason her life was destroyed from the beginning. Rainwater still dripped from Vivian's hair and closed by the time she returned to the motel. The city outside was dark and quiet, but inside her mind, everything felt louder than ever. Vivian Carter could still see Ethan being dragged into black SUV. She could still hear the gunshot echoing through the alley. Most of all, she could still hear the man calling her by a name she had never truly accepted. Whitmore. She locked the motel room door behind her and sat down at the small table near the window. Mason was asleep again. His face looked pale beneath the dim light, and for a moment, Vivian simply watched him breathe. Then she looked down at the note Ethan had left in his bag. Angela Vance. The name meant nothing to her, but it was the only lead she had left. By morning, Vivian had already searched every database, social media page, and public record she could find. Eventually, one result appeared. Angela Vance had once worked as a nurse at a private medical clinic outside the city nearly 20 years earlier. The same clinic mentioned in some of the Whitmore family files. Vivian wasted no time. She drove 2 hours north to a small town near the edge of the state. Angela lived alone in an old white house, surrounded by trees and overgrown bushes. The property looked forgotten, like no one had cared for in years. For a moment, Vivian sat in the car staring at the house. She felt exhausted, emotionally broken. Part of her wanted to turn around and leave, because every answer she found only made things worse. But Ethan was gone, and if she wanted to survive, she needed the truth. Vivian walked to the front door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again. A few seconds later, the door slowly opened. Angela looked to be in her late 60s, with gray hair, tired eyes, and a face filled with a kind of sadness that never fully disappears. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Angela looked at Vivian's face and went completely still. "You look just like her," Angela whispered. Vivian's throat tightened. "Like who?" Angela stepped back slowly. "Elena." Vivian followed her inside. The house smelled like dust, old books, and coffee. Family photographs lined the shelves, but none of them seemed recent. Angela led her into the living room. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Vivian placed a photograph from Damien's safe on the table. Then she placed a birth certificate beside it. Angela stared at both items. Her face lost what little color it had left. "You know who I am," Vivian said. Angela looked down. "I prayed this day would never come." The room went silent. Vivian remained standing because she was too angry to sit. "My name is Isabella Whitmore, isn't it?" Angela closed her eyes. "Yes." The answer hit Vivian harder than she expected, even though she already knew the truth. Hearing someone finally say it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. "You knew my parents?" Angela nodded slowly. "I worked for them for years." "Then tell me what happened." Angela looked away. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she stood up, walked toward an old cabinet, and removed a small wooden box from the top shelf. She carried it back carefully and placed it on the table. Inside were photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings. Vivian sat down. Her hands shook as she looked through them. There were photographs of Thomas and Elena Whitmore smiling at parties, charity events, and vacations. They looked rich, powerful, and happy. Then she found another photo. This one showed Elena holding a little girl, her daughter, Vivian. Elena had dark hair and soft eyes. For a moment, Vivian could not breathe because for the first time in her life, she was looking at her real mother. "She loved you more than anything," Angela said quietly. Vivian stared at the picture. "Then why did she leave me?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to. Those 4 words broke something inside Vivian. Angela slowly explained everything. Years earlier, Thomas Whitmore made several terrible business decisions. He borrowed money from powerful people and lost even more trying to recover it. Eventually, he became trapped in debt to Victor Salazar. At first, Victor acted like a businessman. Then he became something worse. He began threatening Thomas and Elena. He wanted their property, their money, their political connections. And after Elena rejected him, he wanted revenge. Angela explained that Victor's obsession with Elena grew more dangerous over time. He believed Elena should have married him instead of Thomas. He viewed her rejection as humiliation. When Thomas could not repay the debt, Victor offered another arrangement. He would forgive everything if Isabella one day became part of the Salazar family. Vivian felt sick all over again. Angela looked down at the floor. "Your parents said no at first." "At first," Vivian repeated. Angela's silence answered the question before her words did. "They were desperate," Angela finally said. They thought they could keep delaying him. They thought they could protect you later. Vivian stood up so quickly that the chair nearly fell backward. Protect me later? Tears filled her eyes. They made deals about me? Angela could not look at her. They thought they had no choice. No choice. Vivian's voice cracked. I was their daughter. Angela looked heartbroken. They loved you, but they were weak. Those words stayed in the room like poison, because deep down, Vivian knew they were true. Her parents may have loved her, but they had still allowed monsters into their lives. They had waited too long to fight back. And in the end, she was the one who paid the price. Angela then reached into the wooden box and pulled out a sealed envelope. This was for you, she said softly. Vivian opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written in Elena Whitmore's handwriting. My sweet Isabella, if you are reading this, then I have already failed you. I wanted to protect you from this world, but I was too afraid for too long. Your father believed we could fix everything with money, but men like Victor Salazar never stop once they decide they own something. You were never meant to belong to them. If Damien took you away, trust him. He was the only person your father, and I believed, could keep you alive. I am sorry we were not strong enough. Vivian's vision blurred with tears. She read the letter twice, then a third time. Damien, again. Every road kept leading back to him. Angela explained that Damien had known Elena years before she married Thomas. He had once worked with the Whitmore family through business deals connected to his father. Unlike Victor, Damien had never trusted the arrangement involving Isabella. When Elena realized Victor was becoming more dangerous, she secretly contacted Damien for help. He hated Victor, Angela said. He knew what kind of man he was. So, Damien took me? Angela nodded. The night of the fire. Vivian sat back down slowly. The room felt smaller. Her entire life had been built on lies. Her real parents had hidden her. Her adoptive mother never told her the truth. And the man she feared most may have been the one protecting her all along. Then why didn't he ever tell me? Vivian asked. Angela looked at her sadly. Because the more you knew, the more danger you were in. Vivian lowered her head. She wanted to hate Damien. She wanted someone simple to blame. But nothing about this story was simple anymore. Before Vivian left, Angela gave her the rest of the contents from the wooden box. Old photographs, letters, a map of the Whitmore property, and one final item, a small flash drive. What's on it? Vivian asked. Angela looked nervous. Something Damien left for me years ago. Vivian stared at the flash drive. Why didn't you give it to me before? Because he told me only to give it to you if Victor ever came back. A cold feeling moved through Vivian's chest. Back at the motel that night, she inserted the flash drive into her laptop. Several files appeared. Bank accounts, photographs, videos, then one audio recording. Vivian clicked play. Damien's voice filled the room. If you are hearing this, then Victor knows who you are. Vivian froze. The recording continued. Victor will not stop until he finds you. He has spent years believing you were dead. But if he discovers the truth, he will come for you and everyone around you. Then Damien said something that made Vivian's blood run cold. Victor plans to move against me tomorrow night. Vivian sat frozen as she realized Victor Salazar planned to kill Damien Moretti within the next 24 hours. Vivian entered the Mafia world searching for answers, but now she is standing in the middle of a war that could destroy everyone she loves. For several seconds after the audio recording ended, the motel room remained completely silent. Vivian Carter sat frozen in front of the laptop, while Damien's final words repeated inside her mind. Victor plans to move against me tomorrow night. She looked toward Mason sleeping in the other bed. Then she looked at the door. For the first time in her life, running away no longer felt like an option, because no matter where she went, Victor Salazar would keep coming. He had already taken Ethan. He had already destroyed her real family. And if Damien died, there would be no one left standing between Victor and everyone else she cared about. By sunrise, Vivian had made her decision. She was going back to Damien Moretti. The mansion looked different in daylight. Still massive, still heavily guarded, still cold. But this time, Vivian was not sneaking in through the back. She walked directly to the front gate. The guards immediately recognized her from the security footage of the break-in. Within seconds, guns were pointed at her. One of the men grabbed her arm roughly. "You got a lot of nerve coming back here," he said. "I need to see Damien." The guard laughed. "You really think he wants to see the woman who robbed him?" Vivian looked him directly in the eye. "Tell him Isabella Whitmore is here." The moment she said the name, everything changed. The guard's expression disappeared. He stepped back and immediately spoke into his radio. A minute later, the gates opened. Vivian was escorted through the mansion and into Damien's office. This time, Damien was there. Damien Moretti stood near the window with one hand in his pocket. He looked exactly like he had in the photographs. Dark suit, sharp features, cold eyes. But there was something else now. Exhaustion, as if he had spent years carrying something too heavy to put down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien looked at the envelope in Vivian's hand. "You found the safe?" he said quietly. Vivian's jaw tightened. "You knew I would." Damien said nothing. "You knew who I was this entire time." His face remained unreadable. "Yes." The answer hit harder than she expected. All the anger she had been carrying suddenly rose to the surface. "You watched my life fall apart," she said. "You let me believe I was someone else." Damien looked away toward the window. "It was the only way to keep you alive." Vivian stepped closer. "Then tell me the truth." For the first time, Damien looked directly at her. "When your parents realized what Victor wanted, they came to me. Elena knew I was the only one Victor feared. She asked me to take you and disappear before Victor could." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "And the fire?" Damien's face darkened. "Victor started it." The room fell silent. "He wanted your parents dead. He wanted you alive." Vivian felt sick. "Why?" "Because Victor wanted control." Damien said. "He saw you as something he was owed." Vivian wrapped her arms around herself. Damien moved toward his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was an old photograph. He handed it to her. The picture showed Elena Whitmore standing beside Damien years earlier. They looked younger, closer. "You knew my mother," Vivian whispered. Damien nodded slowly. "She saved my life once." Vivian looked at him. "When I was young, Victor tried to kill me," Damien said. "Your mother warned me before it happened." For the first time, Damien's voice carried something other than cold control. "Pain. After that, I owed her." Vivian looked down at the photo again. "So everything you did was because of her?" Damien did not answer right away. Then he quietly said, "At first." Before Vivian could respond, the office door suddenly opened. One of Damien's men rushed inside. "Boss," he said, "we found one of Victor's warehouses." Damien turned immediately. "What about Blake?" The man nodded. "He's there." Vivian's heart nearly stopped. Ethan Blake was alive. Damien looked back at Vivian. "You stay here." "No, this is not your fight." Vivian stepped closer. "It became my fight the moment Victor destroyed my family." Damien stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. An hour later, Damien's convoy raced through the city toward the docks. Black SUVs filled with armed men moved through the streets, while storm clouds gathered overhead. The warehouse stood near the water, surrounded by shipping containers and rusted fences. Victor's men were everywhere. Damien's convoy had barely stopped before gunfire exploded across the docks. The sound echoed through the night. Vivian ducked behind a concrete barrier as bullets shattered windows and tore through metal. Men shouted. Cars crashed. Smoke filled the air. Damien moved through the chaos like someone born for it. Calm, focused, deadly. He fired with cold precision while his men pushed deeper into the warehouse yard. Vivian followed close behind, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Then she saw Ethan. He was tied to a chair inside the warehouse, bruised and bleeding but still alive. She ran toward him while Damien's men covered the entrance. "Vivian!" Ethan whispered as she cut the ropes from his wrists. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly. Then gunfire erupted again. One of Victor's men appeared near the doorway. Vivian grabbed the fallen gun beside her and fired before she could think. The man dropped instantly. For a second, Vivian froze. She had never shot anyone before. Ethan grabbed her arm. Move. They rushed outside. But the battle was far from over. At the far end of the docks, Damien stood face to face with Victor Salazar. Victor looked older than in the photographs, but his eyes were still cold and sharp. Rain poured around them. You should have left the girl dead, Victor said. Damien's face remained calm. You should have left her alone. Victor laughed softly. She was never yours to protect. She was never yours at all. Victor's expression darkened. Then he looked past Damien toward Vivian. For a moment his face changed. He smiled. You look just like your mother. Vivian felt pure hatred rise inside her. Victor took one step closer. She made the same mistake you're making now. She believed someone could save her. Damien raised his gun. Victor did the same. Then everything happened at once. Gunshots exploded through the rain. Victor's men opened fire from the rooftops. Damien's men responded. Chaos returned instantly. Vivian dropped to the ground beside Ethan. Bullets tore through the metal containers around them. One of Damien's men was hit. Another fell near the loading dock. Then Vivian saw something that made her blood run cold. One of Victor's shooters had moved behind Damien. Damien could not see him. Without thinking, Vivian grabbed a gun from the ground and ran. Damien! The shooter raised his weapon. Vivian fired first. The man fell backward. Damien turned just in time to see Victor aiming directly at Vivian. Damien moved in front of her. The gunshot echoed through the docks. For one terrible second, Vivian thought Damien had been hit. Then Victor staggered backward. Blood spread across his chest. Ethan stood behind him holding a gun. Victor looked down in disbelief. Rain mixed with blood as he slowly dropped to his knees. His eyes moved toward Vivian one last time. You were always supposed to belong to me, he whispered. Vivian looked at him with tears in her eyes. No, she said quietly. I was never yours. Victor fell forward onto the wet concrete, dead. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the remaining gunfire slowly stopped. Victor's men began surrendering or running. The war was over. Vivian stood in the rain, breathing hard. Everything felt unreal. Victor was dead. The man who destroyed her family. The man who hunted her for years. Gone. Damien looked down at her. For the first time, the coldness in his face disappeared completely. You should have stayed away, he said quietly. Vivian looked at him. You would have done the same thing for me. Damien did not answer, but the look in his eyes told her enough. Hours later, after police sirens filled the docks and Damien's men cleaned what they could, Vivian returned to the mansion. She was emotionally exhausted. Her clothes were soaked. Her hands still shook from violence. She walked into Damien's office alone. The room looked exactly the same as before, but now everything felt different, because now she knew the truth. As she stood near the desk, she noticed something strange. One of the desk drawers was slightly open. Inside was a small black box. Vivian slowly lifted it out. Inside the box was an old sealed letter with her name written across the front in Damien's handwriting. Vivian stared at it in silence as she realized Damien had written the letter years ago. Vivian thought the nightmare was over, but Damien's final letter contained one secret powerful enough to change everything again. For a long moment, Vivian Carter simply stood in Damien's office, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her name was written across the front in dark ink. Not Vivian Carter. Isabella. The sight of it made her chest tighten. The mansion around her had finally gone quiet. Most of Damien's men had left to deal with the aftermath at the docks. Police sirens no longer echoed through the city. Victor Salazar was dead. The war was over. But as Vivian looked down at the letter, she knew one final truth was still waiting for her. She slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter folded neatly into thirds. The paper looked old, worn at the edges, as if Damien had written years earlier and carried it with him for a very long time. Vivian unfolded it carefully. My Isabella, if you are reading this, then it means I failed to protect you from the truth for as long as I wanted. There are many things I should have told you years ago, but your parents asked me to keep you hidden. They believed that if you ever knew who you really were, Victor would find you. For a moment, Vivian stopped reading. The room felt smaller. She looked toward the window and saw her reflection staring back at her. Isabella, not Vivian, not Carter. The name still felt unfamiliar, even now. She looked back at the letter. The night of the fire, your mother brought you to me herself. She knew Victor's men were already close. She knew she and Thomas would not survive. She made me promise that no matter what happened, I would keep you alive. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. All her life, she had believed her parents abandoned her. Now she knew the truth. They had given her away because they loved her, because they believed it was the only way to save her. She kept reading. Your mother trusted me because she knew me before I became the man people fear today. Before the empire, before the violence, before all of it. Vivian frowned slightly. There was something different in Damien's words now. Something more personal. Your mother and I grew up together. Our families were close before greed and power destroyed everything. She was the only person who ever believed I could become something better than what I was born into. For several seconds, Vivian could not breathe. Elena and Damien had known each other long before Thomas Whitmore, long before Victor, long before the fire. She looked down at the old photograph Damien had shown her earlier. Elena standing beside him, smiling. You loved her, Vivian whispered to herself. Then she looked back at the letter. Yes, I loved her. Vivian's breath caught, as if Damien somehow knew exactly what she would be thinking. I loved her for most of my life, even after she married Thomas. But Elena made her choice, and I respected it. I wanted her happy, even if that happiness did not include me. The tears came harder now, because suddenly Vivian understood Damien in a way she never had before. He had not protected her because of loyalty alone. He had protected her because he loved her mother, because she was the last piece of Elena Whitmore left in the world. Vivian wiped at her face and continued reading. After the fire, I took you far away. I gave you a new name. I placed you in an orphanage because it was the safest way to hide you. I watched from a distance as you grew up. I was there on your first day of school. I was there when you broke your arm riding your bike at age 10. I was there when your mother died. I was there every time life became too heavy for you to carry alone. Vivian lowered the letter slowly. Her entire body shook. All those years, all those lonely moments, all those times she thought she had nobody. Damien had been there, watching from the shadows, protecting her without asking for anything in return. She thought about the times strange things had happened in her life. The landlord who suddenly stopped demanding rent after threatening to evict her. The man who tried to rob her outside the diner and mysteriously disappeared the next week. The anonymous hospital donation that paid for Mason's treatment when he was 12. At the time, she thought they were coincidences. Now she knew they were not. Damien had spent years quietly keeping her safe. Not because he wanted control. Not because he wanted repayment. Because he made a promise. Vivian looked back down at the letter. There's one final truth you deserve to know. She stopped breathing again, because she could feel something terrible waiting on the next line. Thomas Whitmore was not your father. Vivian's hand tightened around the paper. Her vision blurred. She read the sentence again. Then again. Nothing made sense anymore. If Thomas Whitmore was not her father, then who was? The answer came on the next line. I am. Vivian could not move. The world around her seemed to disappear completely. Only the letter remained. Only those two words. I am. She stumbled backward and sat down in Damien's chair. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the paper. No, it could not be true. Her eyes raced across the rest of the letter. Elena never told Thomas the truth. We were together shortly before she married him. By the time she learned she was pregnant, she had already chosen a life she thought would protect you. Thomas raised you as his own because he loved her enough to accept it. Victor never knew. If he had, he would have used it against you both. Vivian stared at the page with tears running down her face. Damien Moretti was not just a man who saved her. He was not just a man who protected her. He was her father. Every memory suddenly felt different. The way Damien looked at her, the way he protected her, the pain in his face whenever he spoke about her mother. It all made sense now. Vivian covered her mouth with one hand as she cried. She had spent her entire life feeling unwanted. Now she realized someone had loved her enough to destroy his own life protecting her. She looked down at the final part of the letter. I know you may hate me after learning the truth. You have every right to. I was not there for birthdays, holidays, or the moments that mattered most. I stood in the shadows because it was the only way to keep you alive. But if there is one thing I need you to know, it is this. You were never abandoned. You were always loved. Vivian closed her eyes. The room around her blurred through tears. For the first time in her life, she finally understood who she was. She was not Vivian Carter. She was not only Isabella Whitmore. She was the daughter of Elena Whitmore and Damian Moretti, a girl born into two worlds, one built on wealth, one built on violence. And somehow, despite everything, she survived both. Hours later, Vivian left the mansion carrying the letter, the photographs, and the truth she had spent her whole life searching for. By morning, she returned to the motel. Mesa was awake now, sitting up in bed. He looked confused when he saw her face. You okay? He asked quietly. Vivian looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. For the first time in years, the answer felt honest. She was not okay, but maybe one day she would be. She spent the rest of the day packing their things. The city no longer felt safe. Too many memories lived there. Too many ghosts. By evening, the motel room was quiet again. Vivian sat near the window with Damian's letter resting in her lap. The sun had already disappeared behind the buildings outside. For the first time in weeks, there were no gunshots, no sirens, no fear. Then someone knocked on the door. Vivian frowned. No one should have known where she was. She stood slowly and walked toward the door. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she opened it. A stranger stood outside beneath the dim motel light. Older, thin, wearing a dark coat. In his hand was another old photograph from Vivian's childhood.